You've probably noticed now that Daniel is having these visions himself. Up until now, he's been serving the king by helping these kings understand their visions. So there might be something to that Daniel was a servant, and so he served the kings first, and then after he interpreted their visions, then he himself started having these visions, and this is how the book is divided. Now, this is the second vision that Daniel had. We find that it was in the third year of Belshazzar. So the timeline is such that Belshazzar was already overcome and Darius had become king, and that was part of the narrative. But these last two chapters actually have pushed us back before that time, while the Babylonians were still an empire and Belshazzar was still the emperor. So what we see here is an accurate vision of history. Well, it's history to us, but it wasn't to Daniel. In fact, his predictions here are so accurate that critics believe there is no way that Daniel could have actually written this. They believe that it could have been written somewhere around 200 BC or even later than that, towards 100 BC or something, but there's no way that Daniel could have been this accurate. Well, we believe that Daniel wrote this. We believe that he wrote this in the 6th century BC, and the accuracy is actually a testimony to the goodness of God. So let's talk about this vision for a moment. Now, when you read down through here, you're going to see some imagery that's important to understand. The first thing is that Daniel is actually speaking from a fortified palace, a citadel. Why is that important? Because this citadel or this fortified palace is a symbol of the strength of the Babylonian Empire. Remember, third year of Belshazzar, so Daniel is still serving the Babylonian kings. And so he's standing in this symbol of strength and grandeur. Now, the second thing that seems to be important is the river. And Daniel sees a ram. In just a moment, we'll talk about the ram and goat specifically. But the second thing that we see in this imagery in the geography is the river. And it seems that that might be significant as well, because rivers represent life. So when you read about a river in the Bible, it's teeming with life, fish, of course, other aquatic animals. The river flows. The river brings life. Wherever the river goes, there's life. And so we have a river that represents the benevolence of God. It represents the blessing of God, ultimately, that brings life. And so we have strength and life. That's kind of the dual picture that Daniel is giving us in these details. Why is that important? Because I think that at least in the third year of Belshazzar, it would appear as though Babylon was strong and alive. So the river and the citadel work together for the man-made structure of strength, the organic structure of life. We have strength and life kind of brought together in this duality that would testify that by all appearances, Babylon was strong and undefeatable. Well, we're going to see that that is a myth. It's a rumor. It's not reality. And I think that just goes to say to us, take heed that we do not give attention to the things that we should, even though by present appearances something can appear strong and alive. Things can change on a dime. And this is why we don't trust in the man-made structures. We trust in God of heaven. Rivers can dry up. There can be drought. And so we don't trust in the things of this world. We trust in God alone. So to me, that's the imagery. Now, he's going to see two animals. One is a ram and one is a goat. What are rams and goats? Well, we think about a ram, and what I think about is the ram in the thicket, the story of Abraham offering Isaac, and the ram was the sacrificial substitute for Isaac. And we also know that there were sacrifices of a goat. We know that there was a scapegoat, for instance, where the ribbon was tied on its horn and it left the camp of Israel, showing that the sins of Israel had actually left. So both the ram and the goat are instruments of sacrifice. Both of them before God complete the plan of God. Can we say it that way? That a ram and a goat in the sacrificial system would actually do the will of God, or at least be part of the process of doing the will of God. And maybe that's what Daniel is saying here, that the ram and the goat are used in sacrifices in the process of God's plan. So we would think that maybe the ram and the goat, they represent both God's plan. It would talk about God's sovereignty, that God is in charge, even of nations and empires. And I think that is definitely the overall theme of the book of Daniel. So here's what he sees. He is standing in the citadel. Over by the river, there's a ram. And the ram has two horns, and we assume that those horns are just the kind of prototypical horns that we see on a ram. However, one is larger than the other. And we see this in the bear vision, where one side of the bear was raised up. And that definitely would fit the Medo-Persian Empire. So the Medes and the Persians made a coalition, but the Persians were much stronger. In fact, in the third year of the reign of Belshazzar, Cyrus was coming to power and actually dominating the Medes. And so we have the Persian Empire, and it is stronger than the Medes, and this is why you see the goat with one large horn and one smaller one. Now this goat moves westward and kind of to the north and kind of to the south. Well, the Persian Empire was east of the Babylonian Empire. So in fact, when the Persians would have invaded Babylon, they would have moved west. So we see that this is the Medo-Persian Empire. It is by the river. It is being fed. It is being nourished. Its life is attributed to this river, and perhaps that just talks about the ultimate sovereignty of God to raise up this empire, this kingdom. But then there comes another one. So Daniel is in the Babylonian Empire, seeing the rise of this ram, which is the Medo-Persian Empire. But then there comes this goat from the west. And this goat's feet don't even touch the ground. So man, it's just hovering above the ground and moving at a high speed with ferocity. And it has one single strong horn between its eyes. Well, that's pretty evident that that's the Greek Empire, and that strong horn was Alexander the Great, who moved so swiftly. So Daniel is saying, while in the Babylonian Empire, there's going to come a Medo-Persian Empire represented by the ram with two horns, one larger. And then after that, that empire would be defeated by the Greek Empire with that single strong horn that would come quickly with ferocity and strength and destroy and break off the horns. Horns represent power, by the way. So it broke off the horns of the ram. But then something interesting happens. That single horn on the goat, which represents Alexander the Great, breaks off. And in its place, it is replaced by four. And we know exactly that happened in history. And see, this is the part where a lot of critics just can't believe that God would show someone this much detail, and it would be so accurate. The death of Alexander the Great, which would have been in the 4th century BC, and then his kingdom was divided into four. And so we'll stop there, because that's really all the further the narrative goes, and then it's interpreted a little bit later. So we'll repeat some of this information. But what's this say to you and me? I always like to conclude to just say, okay, how can I take this into my day? I take this into my day knowing that God knows my future, that God is in charge, that He is sovereign. I take this into my day to remind me that I'm in the world but not of the world. And so the world may consist of a citadel, a man-made structure that represents strength and opulence. The world also is a natural, flowing, organic place where we live, and we're fed from the world. And so there's good things that come from the world, certainly, but this is not my permanent home. This is only my temporary home. And things can change on a dime. I take that into my day-to-day from this passage. God is in charge and He knows the future, but things can change on a dime. And what we think is strong and what we think is flowing and will last forever, it won't. And so we don't put our trust in the things of this world. We put our trust in God and God alone. So that's how this lesson, I think, plays out, and how we are in the world, but not of the world.